Boys and girls, on today's episode of Risk Reward, where we interview entrepreneurs, business leaders about what it takes to be successful today. I have on the show with me a very special guest. His name is Charles, and he has been in healthcare for looks like 30 years, and he's held many positions, including flight paramedic, and he is currently CEO of Salus Strategies. And Charles, thank you for being on the show.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. And Charles, let's just get right into it. What can you tell us a little bit about what you got going on with Salus Strategies?
Yeah. So really, from my background, as a flight medic, and before that, a medic on a ground team, and before that, I was in the hospital working in critical care with respiratory therapy. Sort of had this long history of being in and around healthcare. Really, Salus Strategies came out of a conversation with our president, Casey Mills, who's a good friend of mine. And we originally started as a crisis prevention company. So arming people with knowledge and the ability to get out of, active shooter events and the fire situations in Lanai. And we saw these things going on in our world and really didn't feel like there was a whole lot being done about it. Casey, John Sims, our COO, Caleb Tappan, our Chief Strategy Officer, all those gentlemen have a long history in special forces in the military. I have 30 years in healthcare, in flight, trauma, critical care, as I mentioned. And so we started talking about, man, wouldn't it be great? Wouldn't it be wonderful if we could pool our resources, our knowledge, extensive knowledge in crisis prevention and mitigation, and form a company where we could go out and teach people how to reduce the impact of these crisis events. And so that's a big, broad, sweeping explanation of what Salus does. But really, the first thing we honed in on was the school shootings. In 23, I think we surpassed, I believe the last article I read, we surpassed 700 school shootings. They classify those mass shootings differently depending on what you're reading. But if there's 4 people in a shooting injured or killed, that's considered a mass shooting from one resource. So if you consider there's 700 of those last year, and it's been trending up consistently every year for the past 2 decades. And the answer to that from our nation has been, well, let's try to take away the guns, of which there are millions. Most of the people that commit these acts are suffering from some sort of mental health crisis, and they get the gun illegally. They either steal it or buy it illegally anyway. So there's that attempt, which obviously isn't working. And then there's $3 billion being thrown by our country at other attempts to stem this flow of shootings that really isn't working. So we devised. Go ahead. Sorry.
No, I'm just kind of just trying to absorb it. It's one of those topics that is very tough to talk about, but it is a pertinent and very real situation that is happening in this country. And I'm happy. I wouldn't say happy because it's a weird thing to be happy about, but I'm glad to know that there are people that are attempting to make an impact in something like this.
I thank you. I feel like we're a drop in the well of the problem, but with our history, I have a lot of FEMA experience working with tragedies, mostly natural disaster tragedies. As I mentioned, our team of executives all have special forces, extensive backgrounds in the military. To have those skills and know the answers and sit by and watch this happen and actually get worse, was just not in our wheelhouse. So we built this company with the intent of doing something about these crises around our company,
Wow.
around our country, excuse me.
Wow. Very, very well. It's a very noble cause. I had read up a little bit about Salus, but I didn't know that that was the kind of uh, catalyst or foundation that you know where it came from.
Actually, a friend of one of my children was involved in a school shooting, which was really the tipping point for me. Not having that military background, but having the healthcare side of it. When I met Casey and we started talking about it, it was we had the missing pieces, and we were able to put those together to form Salus Strategies. So our name Salus is actually Latin for safety, and our company motto is Custodire Innocentes, which is Latin for protect the innocent. So the name of our company literally means safety strategies to protect the innocent.
I like that. I like that. And tell us tell us about, as a company, who are your customers? Who do you consult with? Who do you aim to help?
So again, first and foremost, we've spoken to many schools. There's a lot of trepidation about the training, quite frankly. And the way I present it is, I remember being in grade school when we used to do fire drills, and the teachers made them not scary. It was just a part of life. If there's a fire, everybody stand up, go to the door, line up single file, hold hands, go out this way. Teaching and instructing on an active shooter does not have to be scary for those kids. And it will absolutely, literally save lives. I show a video of a shooting in Texas during a girls' basketball game, and there's two games going on actually, one on the near court, one on the far court, and then you can hear these pops, and it's just absolute chaos. People are running around. They don't know where the shots came from. They don't know where the exits are. It's pure pandemonium, and that, just like in a fire, that is truly what kills people. And so to be somewhat rehearsed in a calm, settled environment, I think we're missing the boat.
You make a very good point. I live in California. Been born and raised in California my whole life. I remember having fire drills, but also earthquake drills.
Yeah.
So, it is a sad reality, but let's face it, it is reality, and you're right. I mean, preparation is half the battle. It really can make a big difference.
Our approach, there are quite a few companies that offer these types of services in different forms or fashions. We try to take a different approach. We arming a teacher or doing something like that really would be the last thing that we would advocate for. We've partnered with a cybersecurity company that really focuses on open source intelligence. So when I present, I talk about this ring. It looks like a target, and the target is the school, and the outer rings are layers of protection that we want to build around, a bank or a school, let's say, whatever the organization is that we're working with. And the first one is this open source intelligence. And so we can put a cyber net or a cyber fence around an organization and monitor any sort of traffic on Facebook or on social media for that organization. Because what we found is statistically, these attackers, these shooters, these aggressors, they do what we call beaconing. And so you've seen it after the fact, unfortunately, many times. They'll pull up a student's Facebook page, and he's been posting on there for months. I'm going to go shoot the school up. I'm going to do these horrible things. I'm going to go back to my workplace at the bank and kill everybody there. They've been talking about it for months.
Yeah, yeah. I do remember hearing things like that after the fact, but I never knew that there were technologies in place to monitor that sort of thing. That's very innovative. And how did that come about?
So the company we work with is called Open Source Intelligence, and quite frankly, it's been used against terror organizations and other things for decades, governmentally.
Hmm.
they can do things that obviously we would never think about doing on the civilian side. But it is as simple as and especially with the advent of artificial intelligence, it's as simple as putting up flags or identifiers or things to watch for. An example would be John Smith's school. We might have our team of analysts put a cyber fence around that school saying, hey, watch for any Facebook posts on these 300 students about John Smith School, AR-15, gun, handgun, shooting, aggression, and it will just passively watch for those types of things. If we do get a hit, the analysts have an algorithm that they can plug in those beacons, and they can, within 99 to 98% accuracy, tell, is this student just reaching out for attention, or are they serious about doing this?
This reminds me of that movie with Tom Cruise and the three kids
Minority
that were able
Report.
to look into the future. You know which one I'm talking about?
Minority Report, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it's not quite as prognostic. That one was looking into the future.
Right.
We look retrospectively, but we look at an algorithm that actually can tell. And our analyst, I questioned this. I said, I want to see this in action. And she gave, our lead analyst gave me 2 examples. And she said, you tell me which one of these ends up doing something aggressive. And I chose wrong. And she said, if you look at all these details of what he's posting, this person it's a cry for help. He is not a lone wolf shooter. And here's the things that we look for. And this person, who I felt was a lot more benign, ended up going on to try and commit a school shooting. So,
Wow.
so that is the first ring of protection. The second one is we teach you skills and abilities to mitigate when there is, a shooting in your building. Lots of different things that I probably don't have time to go into, but not only countermeasures, but measures to stop bleeding and how to apply a tourniquet. We teach an entire stop the bleed course. So if 80% of the time you will come across or could come across a coworker that's shot, simple application of pressure on a dressing can save their life.
That's something like how CPR has become a very it's something that's taught commonly, and now that I think about it, applying a tourniquet is equally life-saving in the right circumstance. And how many people know how to do that? I certainly don't. So
And it's so easy. It is so easy. Or using the AED, the defibrillators. That's everywhere now.
Wow. Well, it it is a noble service that you're doing with Salus, and I want to shift gears here a little bit to talk about something a little bit lighter. Although what you're talking about now is very relevant in today's society, and like I said, I'm glad to know that there are people out there, and not just Salus, but as you mentioned, others that are trying to make an impact, which is again a very noble thing. And I salute you and the folks working at Salus and those other companies. And thank you for confronting something that is very hard to confront at times. So very commendable. Let's talk about your experience with as a flight medic, which was something that when I came across your profile on LinkedIn, really piqued my interest. So tell us about that and how you got started in that, and give us some stories if you got them, and give us a little bit of insight into that world.
Yeah, I still say that was not only one of my first careers out of college, but still probably my most favorite. It is a tough job. I commend those people, much like our warriors, our soldiers on the front line, these EMS, paramedics, EMTs, and all of that EMS support staff. They're on the front lines every day. It is a mentally, physically abusive career. So I commend them. My journey through EMS started in college. I got my degree, bachelor's degree in cardiopulmonary science, with the idea that I would be go on to be a cardiac PA. Really was my goal. While I finished up my bachelor's degree, I needed a job. I was married, had our first son. I sat for the respiratory care boards, the national boards. And then while I waited for the return of the results from the boards, a friend of mine was taking a EMT course, and he said, "Hey, yes, you should do this. It's kind of cool, kind of up your alley." And so I did that. I sat for the EMT basic course, loved it, absolutely loved it. And I thought, man, how applicable, if I'm hunting or if I just come across an accident, or there's so many things that can be applied, clearing a choking child, there's so many things. So I loved it so much, I sat for the EMTI, which in my day was EMT intermediate. Then I went on to be a full-fledged paramedic trained by our hospital, and just fell in love with it. So I moved away from the PA track and steered more toward adult transport. Critical care adult transport really was my niche. And then as a respiratory therapist, those two professions dovetailed really nicely. And I ended up on the flight team being the person that sits at the head of the person either in the ambulance or on the we call it fixed wing. I got to change my vernacular. It's an airplane. So either on the airplane or the helicopter, I sit at the head of the bed and manage the airway, make sure that person can breathe.
Awesome. Awesome. And were you mostly on an airplane? Did you do helicopter as well?
So I actually started out, my first job out of school was in Alaska, Anchorage, Alaska, at Alaska Regional Hospital and Providence Medical Center. And I started training for that. And I started training for the helicopter, which is similar, but much different environment. And you train a little differently for the helicopter because you can actually land on site. I have a really good story for you a little later about that. But so I started to train toward the helicopter, and then we moved back to Montana, and I went to work for D-Care on the fixed wing, mostly because my wife, we started having our second and third child, and it's a little bit riskier with the helicopter. People say jokingly that there's 2,000 moving parts all in the wrong direction, and so she thought that the airplane would be a little bit safer. So I steered more toward the airplane for the bulk of my career.
Happy wife, happy life, huh?
That's right.
Yeah. So tell us that story about the landing outside. Or you mentioned you had a good story.
Yeah. Well, it was on a training mission, and as a respiratory therapist, I did hundreds of intubations, which is, you probably have seen it on the ER show, where they take the silver tool and they insert it into the mouth and they lift and put the breathing tube down. That's a laryngoscope followed by an ET tube or a breathing tube. And so I was really good at those because as a respiratory care practitioner, we had to get hundreds of them before we could get certified. Many times that's more than an EMT or a paramedic would have. So even though this was a training mission, this was something I was really good at. So we landed on the highway, and it was the site of a semi-car head-on collision. The semi ended up rolling, smashing, jackknifing, and then rolling down the middle of the interstate. And the driver was trapped upside down. So by the time we got there, fire and EMS ground services had gotten there and gotten most of the folks they could get to stabilize, but this gentleman was still trapped, and he was trapped in the cab of his rig upside down. So fire had started to try and extricate him, but the injuries were so bad that he started to expire. So when we got there, we needed to get in there. It was safe enough, there were no fuel leaks or anything. We had to get in there and stabilize him so they could finish cutting him out. So I found myself, I said, I can do this. I crawled in the cab of the truck, and upside down, he was hanging, pinned by his legs and the seat belt, and he was unconscious. And, as you can imagine, his arms are up like that, and he's essentially dying. And I was able to get upside down and get the tube in his throat, hooked him up to a transport vent, and we were able to stabilize him.
Wow.
We called it bagging. You see him with the big balloon and they're pushing air into him. So I had to sit there and bag him for a while until he stabilized. Then we put the vent on and I was able to move so they could finish cutting him out. But I never forget that. And I've got stories for days, but
Sheesh. Yeah, no, those are high stakes, high pressure situations, and yeah, that's truly when the preparation, like you mentioned, like you'd done hundreds of them before.
yeah.
So, that's when that really comes to the forefront. That's quite a story. Wow.
I think
Sheesh.
I want to be sure too, and that was not me doing something extraordinary to save that gentleman's life. That was an entire team of EMS people all working together. If fire hadn't been able to cut away enough of the cab to allow me to get in there, if EMS ground hadn't stabilized the other patients, I mean, there were so many pieces and parts and participants of the team to make that all possible. And that really is the key takeaway of an EMS service. They are an absolute machine of a team if you ever have the opportunity to see them work together.
Wow. Yeah, no, I imagine that it takes a lot of skilled hands to pull off something like that.
Yeah, really does. A lot of professionals in those situations.
Man. Well, that's just I think that is such a cool profession that it's how do for our listeners that might have gotten curious about that and want to know more, what does it take to become a flight paramedic? What's the training like, and what can you tell us something about that?
So it's gotten much more rigorous, which is great. There's actually paramedic schools you can go to specifically to become a paramedic, which is sort of the high end of that training. But really, nowadays with the advent of COVID, and I want to make sure I mention some of these statistics. Right now, we have around 250,000 EMT paramedics in our country. There's 18,000 open positions right now, or we're lacking 18,000 EMT paramedics. So literally, the vast majority of emergency medical systems in our country are short-staffed. So,
When you say 250,000, it seems like a lot, but when you sit down and think about it, this country is a country of 330 or 40 million people.
right.
So that when you put it in perspective like that, there's not a lot of trained people to go around for the population that we have.
No, and unfortunately, what happened during COVID, and I was a hospital administrator at the time during COVID, so I watched the whole thing happen from the front seat. The focus was so much on nursing and doctors, the shortages across the country, and how do we increase our nursing numbers, and how do we increase our doctor numbers, and how many beds do we have, that unfortunately, the emergency medical services sort of got somewhat forgotten about. And now all of a sudden, over the last 5 to 6 years, people have realized that, good grief, our entire emergency medical system suffered just as much or more than the hospitals and the nurses and the folks within those hospitals. And now
I imagine
we're
burnout plays a lot into that.
absolutely, absolutely. And the same scenario that happened with the nursing burnout, people saying, I'm not doing this anymore. I didn't sign up for this. That same thing has happened with the EMS services.
Mm, mm.
And so now we're caught in this, trying to increase schools, trying to recruit people, trying to increase pay. But unfortunately, we have 18,000 missing professionals in that arena. That's going to balloon to 40, 50, 60,000 needed assets, needed professionals by 2030, I think is what I read recently, depending on your source.
Is that because there's like a wave of retirements coming, or what do you think that's due to?
Multi-factors. I think a lot of paramedics that stuck it out, they're going to be hitting retirement age. We've got a consistently increased demand on those folks, the amount of runs they do, um, just the need. We see fire services trying to pick up some of those services, combining EMS with fire. Um, but most of it has to do with good old supply and demand. Increased demand, diminishing supply of folks.
Hmm.
So to become one is not important, it's imperative. If there are young folks out there that are at all interested in doing this, it is a fantastic career if it's something you want to do long term. It is an even better foundation for anything else in healthcare you want to do. It's applicable to nursing, to respiratory therapy, to physical therapy. It's a fantastic base medical training for anything else you want to do, and you get to serve while you're gaining that experience.
Do you have an insight into what the demographics currently look like for people in the profession?
Um, I don't probably have any. That's a great question. I don't know that I have any hard and fast demographics. Male, female, it's split pretty evenly. Age,
Does
like I
it
said,
skew young?
COVID drove a lot of the old timers out, as it did with nursing. A lot of the guys that have been doing it for 20, 30 years, they said, I can't do this much longer. The ones that stuck it out now are getting to the retirement age. So I would say purely by attrition and the pressure put on by COVID, if I was to find a source, I'll bet you it would skew toward the young. Plus, as I started off the conversation with, it is just a physically grueling job.
Tell us about that. Like what is the way that from my limited um contact with through what I do, I'm a risk management insurance professional, and I've been consulting with ambulances, NEMT providers. The one thing that I seem to notice is that a lot of back strains from picking people up, hoisting people up on a gurney, slips, trips, falls. Give us a little insight into what someone can do to prepare for this physically demanding job. What are the physical demands, you know, that are made on EMS? Like, give us a little bit insight into that.
So if you look at the needs of the job, so first and foremost, the paramedics and EMTs, a lot of times are involved in gun violence. Now, many, if not all, have policies that state, if there's an active shooting event going on, they are not going to go in and do that. They have armed professionals trained with enough EMS background that they can sort of go into that combat zone setting and do that. So, but they're still in a pretty risky environment from a violence standpoint. A lot of times they're responding to domestic violence. And so there's some friction there that unfortunately a lot of times they get involved in. And then, using the case of mine where I'm inside an upside down vehicle, there's a inherent risk with that. But physically, if you think about doing chest compressions, if you've ever, sometime go to an EMS or a CPR class and just do 3 to 5 minutes of consistent chest compressions. That's pretty tough. I mean, it's a
It's
burn.
very taxing.
Yeah, and they teach you how to trade off so that you're continuing the same pressure and the consistency. And then you talk about in the flight setting, the amount of gear that I carried on while trying to carry a gurney onto the airplane. I had a flight vent, an oxygen tank, a flight bag full of stuff, probably 60, I'm not sure what happened there.
Pretty cool.
Probably,
Pretty cool effects there.
I was probably carrying 60 pounds of gear. And then while I'm on my knees in the airplane backing up, I'm lifting the gurney, holding all this stuff on my shoulders and backing the patient in locking them in on the skid into the airplane. So,
Are you a tall, well-built guy at this age when you were doing this?
I'm 6'4", 225. So I was
Okay.
probably not well suited for those little airplanes. So
But the physical strength helped a lot, I'm sure.
you have to keep yourself, if you're gonna be make it a career and stay in there a long time, you really have to keep yourself in physical shape. You really do. Much like firefighters, they have got to keep their physical.
Yeah, when I go to these, when I make visits sometimes to these station, there's one that looks like it used to be an old fire station, and it just like a private ambulance like moved in there,
Yeah,
and they got the weights and they got the stuff that keep them fit while they're waiting for the next call. So
yeah.
I'm sure that has to play a big part in it.
It does. The most successful paramedics, EMTs that have been able to do it for 20 years and so on, they're usually in really good shape, take care of their backs. There's more, the industry is more and more coming out with mechanisms and mechanical mechanisms to help take the load off, like gurneys that will automatically lift themselves up into the back of a truck,
Mm.
so that you don't have to strain to lift like we did in the old days. And a lot more lifts and hoists and things that do the compressions for you.
Mm.
It's pretty cool.
Are there, one thing that I've seen a lot of and heard a lot of noise about is wearable technology. Have you seen anything like that in the field?
There's wearable defibrillator vests so it's a vest you put on and acts like a external AED.
Okay.
That's one thing I'm familiar with. There's so much tech. I'm not exactly sure specifically what you're talking about, but what is
Like for example, for from a risk management standpoint, uh, there are wearable pieces of technology that a worker would wear that will indicate you're bending at the wrong angle, or you're doing something that you're going to strain your back. Have you seen anything like that out in the field?
personally, I have not seen that, but
Okay.
it would not surprise me. I mean, they're just they're coming out with some amazing stuff. Very
Yeah,
cool.
no, it's quite a time to wearable technology and the Internet of Things. All that stuff is just moving so fast. It's really quite, you know, the speed at which it's moving is just blinding. It's just crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, and but that's so going back, you, for anybody that would be interested in this profession, school, get into a school, get into a program, and it sounds like there's just jobs waiting, basically.
I don't think you'd have any trouble getting employed. And, it takes some time. The flight paramedics, say what you will, the flight takes the longest time to get to. You have to have so many hours. A lot of flight companies won't even look at you without 3 years of extensive critical care ground transport skill. And then you have to, be trained to to do things in that flight environment that are just unique.
Yeah,
Starting an IV and for the most part, doing those similar functions on the back of a truck are difficult too. But in a helicopter, everything's bouncing, and so to start an IV in a helicopter while it's moving is a whole nother set of skills than parked in the
man,
back of a truck and.
I can only imagine that. That must be like, again, like high stakes, high pressure type of environment where you have to have a lot of hours of training to really make sure you don't make a mistake, which could be very costly, and so very very. But at the same time, I find that sort of thing just fascinating. It's just very very cool just to think about. I don't know if that's something I could ever do personally. The sight of blood kind of makes me like squeamish, so maybe it's not the right profession for me. But man, I really tip my hat off to people who are able to do it.
Yeah, me too. And imagine the day when you pick up a phone and you say, 911, my wife's on the floor having a heart attack. Please send an ambulance. And she says, I'm sorry, there's nobody to come. Everybody's busy. We don't have enough trucks. All of our crews are out. That day could actually happen.
Man,
That is a plausible thing that could happen, much like our police force. We're not answering calls after 6 o'clock anymore. Unless we address this and get really aggressive about this problem, that could be a reality.
well, I hope that reality doesn't come. But in order to prevent it, there's a lot of hard work that needs to go into it in terms of getting people trained up, getting people that to basically want to do the job. I was talking to someone yesterday that, with TikTok and Instagram and everybody just wants to be famous on the internet, it's hard to get young people to just pick up a trade. It's just a simple, you know, something as simple as a commercial driver's license. People don't want to put in the time or they think they can make money faster and easier just recording themselves and going viral. So it's just, another time that we're living in.
Yeah. Yeah, it's true. And what's so cool about right now is that if a young person had an interest in doing this, they would not have to try very hard to find a service or a hospital willing to pay for their schooling.
Hmm.
In return, they would put in, a couple of years of work at that place. But that is a common thing right now is service paid scholarships for folks to get training. And that's not just in EMS, it's in nursing, physicians, you name it. The healthcare
Wow.
industry has arms wide open for anybody that's interested in getting in.
Hmm. That's good to know. I wasn't aware. I mean, I've heard of programs where they send you to school, but I didn't know that included, just it's a bit. Do you know about these? Do they pay in full or like, how does that work?
There's all variety. Uh, yeah, full to partial to, and a lot of it is connected with the commitment that you want to give. If you sign up with Providence Medical Center and you want to become a nurse or a paramedic, and you're willing to work 1 year for every year they pay a scholarship, in EMS it might be 3 years, then yeah, they'll pay for everything. The
Wow.
whole the whole thing. And a nurse, it's a 4-year RN degree. They pay for all 4 years. You work there for 4 years, and then you're free, full ride. Just
Wow.
depends.
Now, is it while you're training, are you also working or are you just going to school basically at the beginning?
So typically you have to follow the curriculum of the training. The first couple of years are usually very didactic. But again, it just really depends on the program. But typically, they want to get you in and around those patients and learning as quickly as possible. Many of the programs have room if you want to be a certified nursing assistant in your off time. You study during the day and do your homework, and then maybe pull a shift as a CNA from time to time. It just really, really varies. But
Hmm.
I can guarantee they would not frown on somebody that wanted to get in the hospital and get their hands dirty and start gaining experience right away. They would welcome that.
Hmm. Very interesting stuff. Very, very good to know. So hopefully, young folks out there listening, you can get paid, you can get trained, and then go into a well-paying profession.
Yep, absolutely.
All right, so great. We touched on what you're doing today. A little bit about your history as a flight paramedic. What do you got planned for what's on the horizon for you?
So really, Salus Strategies is my primary focus right now. We are. It's funny that you mentioned you're a risk, a risk insurance person. We are in the process of partnering with insurance folks just like yourselves, because it's our true belief that if people will take the time to arm themselves with, knowledge and training, that we can reduce the overall impact of any crisis. And it's not just an active shooter, but it can be, again, like the fires in Lanai. If you've got to have a crisis plan, how are you going to mitigate it, reduce the impact, and then how are you going to recover from it? And so we've partnered with several insurance companies to go out to their individuals, do this teaching with them in the hopes of sort of like medicine, preventative medicine.
Very
And
cool.
overall for the risk insurers, reduce the impact of on your end as well.
Yeah, I mean, an incident like that can be a tremendous, tremendous financial catastrophe, and not just we're not, it's callous to talk about money when there's people bleeding out, but it's the reality of how we've structured our society, right? Somebody's got to pay. So it really does behoove companies to think about it strategically and mitigate risks to reduce cost. At the end of the day, that's really just a business strategy. And again, I know it just sounds so weird to be talking about business when we're talking about lives at stake, right?
Right.
But it's just a reality that we're in.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. And coming from the hospital industry, I've always felt squeamish about tying dollars to people, but we also used to say no margin, no mission. Without
Exactly. At the end of the day, these services, whether it be hospital services, EMS services, a lot of them are paid for and funded by corporations that need to turn a profit.
right,
It's just, how else are you going to get these out in a mass distribution channel? There's only so much that your local fire department can do, your local paramedics can do.
right.
There's private entities that need to pick up the slack, and it again, it's so strange and kind of like, how could we tie dollars and lives together? But somebody's got to pay for the services, and then they got to get paid too. So it's just the way it works.
Yeah. The other primary focus for Salus Strategies and our executive team, we are really focused on trying to fill those 18,000 needed professionals in paramedic and EMT. And so we have a travel staffing arm of the company now, and are becoming one of the top suppliers of paramedics and EMTs. Interestingly enough, we have some very novel, unique ideas in working with the federal government on how to increase the supply of paramedics and EMTs. But right now, what we're doing is taking the resources, the folks that are already there, and giving them different opportunities. If you're a brand new EMT in a local service, as you can imagine, if you grew up in that service and for the last 10 years, all you know is this little town, it's the same runs, your skill level's the same. Many of these folks we send on travel opportunities, we might put them in California or Florida or a busy Chicago area. They get to go there for 13 weeks and work on a contract, and their skill level goes through the roof. They might see gunshot wounds and things they would never see in their other service. And so that appeals to a lot of people.
That makes a lot of sense. That you know, let's just be honest. As cool as a profession, any profession, it's a job, right?
Yeah.
And if you do it day in, day out, just like any other job, you get kind of naturally bored of doing the same thing, and especially I can imagine in these smaller towns or cities, municipalities, not a lot's going on, so maybe you're just sitting at the station most of the time,
Yeah.
and that's a resource. That person's a resource, a well-trained resource that could be used in another setting. So that is a really cool concept that you guys are onto. Is that something that you guys are doing a lot of or seeing a lot of?
Yeah, that's primarily, I mean, when somebody looks for a travel contract, especially as a paramedic EMS, the pay is much better. And our model, we have a low overhead model where we pay our people better, we charge the customer less, and we take less of a margin. We have, we don't have brick and mortar buildings. We utilize remote workers. We have, remote HR. We have remote, we utilize technology to keep our overhead low. And we pass all those savings off to our employees and our employers.
Wow,
And
that's
so
really cool.
yeah, and that's why people really come to us, is they're looking for an adventure, typically, better pay, and just something different. There are people out there that they do travel contracts full time. That's all they want to do, because they love the variety and the mix. The other thing that we'll do is if an employer comes to us and says, "Hey, I need 10 paramedics for the next 13 to 15 weeks." If they like those people, if they really jive and the medic loves where he's working, we encourage him to hire. So we don't have a no poaching clause or anything like that. So
Very cool. Very cool. Awesome. Well, I'm gonna just share your website for anybody that might be interested in checking out Salus Strategies. It is, hold on, give me 1 second. What's going on here? Or I thought I can just click on this button and your website would pop up, but having some technical issues. Tell our listeners your website so they can check you out.
yeah, it's Salus Strategies, SALUS strategies.com. And we have two arms of the company, the defense side and the staffing side, and it's pretty clear which each of those sides are as you access the website. And we have partners, other companies that we work with, and if we can't get you an answer for something that you look at, we have a lot of industry partners that we can steer you in the right direction.
Well, that's awesome. I encourage any listeners out there that are currently in the EMS field that want to try something new, different, check out salusstrategies.com.
Thank you.
Well, Chuck, it has been a pleasure, and you learned a lot from our conversation, and I hope the listeners did too. So thank you so much. Maybe in the future, sometime we can reconnect and talk again.
Absolutely, Michael. I appreciate you reaching out, and this has been a pleasure.
Awesome.